So let's continue with Hilchot Shabbat, Perek Yud Gimel Halacha Kaf. So just to remind you, we studied in Halacha Tet Zayin that if you throw an object from one Reshut Yachid to another Reshut Yachid, and in the middle there's a Reshut Rabim, we said that he's Patur Aval Asur. The reason he's Patur Aval Asur is because he did Akira in Reshut Yachid and Hanacha in Reshut Yachid. Right, and there was a few distinctions. There were a few nuances. In the law. We also said that if a person throws an object from one Reshut Rabim to another Reshut Rabim, and Reshut Yachid is in the middle, that he's patur, assuming again that there was no Dalet Amot. Okay, we studied that already. But then let's go back to Reshut Yachid. From one Reshut Yachid to another Reshut Yachid and Reshut Rabim in the middle, we said that if you hand the object, meaning you don't throw the object, rather you stretch your hand and you place the object on the other Reshut Yachid, right? And the Reshut Rabim is Na'am. So we said in this case he's Hayav, right? We said because of the Agalot in the Agalot in the Midbar, they used to have one Agala, then would have another Agala, and then they would stretch the Kerashim. The guy would be standing on one Agala, he would stretch the Keresh to the other Agala so that it would rest. The ultimate objective was to have the Keresh, was to have the plank of wood rest on the two Agalot. One side of the plank was on one wagon, the other side of the plank was on the other wagon, right? So that was what happened in the desert. Nevertheless, because of that, there's a special law of Hoshata. So we said in that case he's Hayav. It's not Patur, right? Right, and we also, there was a nuance there. We said that it has to be on the parallel to Reshut Rabim, meaning it shouldn't be like across the street, but it's parallel to the street. So two houses on the same side of the street, you stretch from one house to the other. It's Hayav. We studied that last time. Now, something similar. Halacha Kaf, Shachach ufashat yado, vehi mele'a ferot. Let's say a person has fruits in his hand, maybe a cluster of grapes, and he mistakenly stretches his hand, and imagine he's in a house, or he's in a courtyard. Back then there was courtyards around the houses. So he's in one courtyard, let's say, which is a Reshut Yachid, and there's a window in the wall of the courtyard, and he's holding a cluster of grapes, and he wants to take the cluster of grapes, he wants to put it through the window in his haser, stretch it across his window into the window in the of the other haser. So from one Reshut Yachid to the other Reshut Yachid, and there's a Reshut Rabim in the middle. In between, the area between the two haserot is a Reshut Rabim. This is Hoshata. He should be Hayav. If he does it, he would be Hayav, right? Because of the law that we studied. We said that when you stretch something over from one Reshut Yachid to the other Reshut Yachid, if it's on the same side of the Reshut Rabim, right? It has to be parallel to the Reshut Rabim. We explained that, right? Then in that case, he's Hayav. So let's say in this case, he forgot. He forgot it was Shabbat. And he stretched his hand outside, filled with this cluster of grapes. And he reached the window of his haser, and now his hand is outside the window of his haser. And as he's about to have his hand enter the window of the adjoining haser, nizkar, v'nizkar kodem she'achnis. And before his hand enters the window of the other haser, he didn't do the melacha. He remembered it's Shabbat. Now, at this point, his hand is in the air of Reshut Harabim. The question is, may he return his hand to his Reshut Achid. He's not going to take the grapes and take them to the other Reshut Achid because that would be Yisur Deoraita, right? Because of the laws of Hashata. Although technically it wouldn't be Yisur Deoraita since he started Beshogeg, he started in a state of lack of knowledge. Even though when he ends the Melacha, it would be in a state of knowledge, it would be Yisur Derabanan. Nevertheless, had he done the entire Melacha, it would have been Hayab, right? So what does he do? He may not continue, he may not finish the Melacha. He may not. What does he do? In this case, he may return his hand to the Haser, meaning to his Haser, right? He may return his hand to his Haser. But of course, to finish the melacha that he started and say, listen, I'm in the Reshut Rabim now. What difference does it make if I take the fruits back to my chaser, which is a Reshut Yachid, or I continue it to the other chaser, which is a Reshut Yachid, right? Same thing. The answer is it's a difference, because had you done the entire action with knowledge, b'mezid, you would have been hayab. It's true that now it's going to be patur aval asur, but the point is we don't want to encourage this type of forgetfulness because people tend to forget what's convenient to forget, right? So that's why the Hachamim said, return your hand back to your haseb. Let me explain this law a little more. Let's say a person is in Reshut Yachid and he's holding an object in his hand, and now he stretches his hand to the air of Reshut Rabim. He never does Hanacha in Reshut Rabim. We said he's going to be Patur aval asur, right? Because he only did half a melacha. Let's say a person puts his empty hand into Reshut Rabim. He's standing in Reshut Yachid. He puts his empty hand into Reshut Rabim, and somebody else puts an object in his hand. And the person standing in the Reshut Yachid, now he has an object in his hand. His hand is in Reshut Rabim, and he brings his hand into Reshut Yachid. He's also Patur aval asur, because even though he never did Akira in Reshut Rabim, but he moved the object from Reshut Rabim and he made Hanacha in Reshut Yachid. So the object that was in Reshut Rabim, he's now maniach that object in the Reshut Yachid. So this Patur aval asur. Okay, so now let's look at our situation again. There's a Reshut Yachid, he's in one haseb. He wants to stick his hand through the window. He's going to go through Reshut Rabim to the other haseb. He remembers now his hand is in the air of Reshut Rabim and his hand is holding an object. Normally, you would tell this person, you can't, if your hand is in Reshut Rabim with an object, you can't bring your hand back into your house or into your haseb, because that's Patur aval asur, it's Yisur Derabanan. You're not doing Akira, but it's considered you're doing Hanacha. So therefore, you would look at this situation and tell the person, well, there's no good choices. Why are you telling him to bring his hand back into the Reshut Yachid? Well, it's Yisur Derabanan. And the answer is because there are no good choices. Let me explain. If he was to continue his hand into the other Reshut Yachid, that would be a melacha that's considered to be Isur Deoraita, even though under the circumstances it's not Isur Deoraita, because the Tehillah of the melacha was Bishogeg. Okay, but that's certainly not a good choice. That's not a good solution to the problem. We tell him, well, drop the object in the Reshut Rabim. That's also not a good solution to the problem, because had he Milecha Tehillah taken his hand from Reshut Yachid to drop an object in the Reshut Rabim, that would also be Yisur Deoraita. So what are we going to tell him? We'll tell him, do an act that cannot be an Yisur Deoraita under any circumstance, meaning there is no circumstance where somebody puts an object in your hand in the Reshut Rabim and you stretch your hand back to the Reshut Yachid that's considered Isur de Oraita. That's always considered Isur de Rabbanan. So we tell him to do the Isur de Rabbanan, the pure Isur de Rabbanan, as opposed to the other two alternatives, which would potentially be Isurim de Oraita. And that's what we tell him, bring your hand back into the Hasidah where you're in. Aval. As we said, he cannot continue his hand to the next Hasid over, because that was his original intention. It's true that original intention was something he did when he was in the state of Shegaga, because he didn't remember that it was Shabbat. But that would be an Isur D'Oraita. So no, we're not going to tell him to do that. And that's when we tell him, bring your hand back. Obviously, again, to drop the object in Ishut Rabim, that would again be Isur D'Oraita. Right? So we tell him, bring your hand back to the Ishut Yachid. If the person does it b'mezid, again, he knows it's Shabbat, and he intentionally stretches his hand from his house through the air of Rishut Rabim, and he wants to put the fruits in the other house, right? He does it b'mezid, right? And suddenly, midway, when he's in the air of Rishut Rabim, he becomes terrified of doing his Shabbat. He becomes scared, and he makes teshuvah. He doesn't want to finish the melacha. Okay, what do we do? What do we do with this person? Now, we're not going to tell him to finish the melacha. Obviously, that would be Isur D'Oraita, right? And he did it b'mezid. The only thing is, now he decided to make teshuvah. So what's a guy supposed to do? The Chacham is walking in the streets and says, Walak, Yahmar, what are you doing? Halil Shabbat. So the guy gets scared. He doesn't want to do Halil Shabbat. So he's not going to put his hand back in continue his hand to the other window, because that would be Isur D'Oraita. He doesn't want to do that. Tell him, okay, return your hand to the house where you came from. That would be Isur de Rabbanan. Now the thing is, it's Isur de Rabbanan, but the predicate was an Isur de Oraita. So we don't want to give him the option to get out with an Isur de Rabbanan, because originally he was going to do Isur de Oraita. Now it's true, in the first case that we studied, the person forgot that it's Shabbat. So we say, since when you took your hand out of the window, you forgot that it's Shabbat, we're going to let you return it to the window. In this case, the predicate of his action was, I'm going to do Isur de Oraita. And then he decided to make teshuvah. So we're not going to give him an easy way out. We're not going to tell him, okay, return your hand to the house and that's it. Khalas, Isur de Rabbanan. So what do we tell him? What's the solution? He can't drop in on the Rishut Rabim intentionally. That would be Isur de Oraita mamash. He took it out of his house. He did Akira on purpose. And now he's going to do Hanacha. So what is he going to do? The Kenaz says he has to keep his hand out there, outside, taking from the window, holding the fruits until Shabbat finishes. That's the Kenaz. Now, you're all thinking, well, there's only so long a person can keep his hand outside the window like that, holding fruits. And that is correct. You would be correct for thinking that. But if his hands become stiff and he just can't take it anymore, he's in pain, and he finally opens his hand because he can't hold the fruits anymore, that would be an unintentional act. And that would be a shogeg. That would be a shogeg in the sense that he can't hold the fruits anymore. Interesting, maybe it's even an anus, an ones. Finally, his hands just opened. But it's not Isur D'Oraita, because had he intentionally dropped the fruits in Rishut Rabim, his hand was tired, that would be Sudoraita, potentially. But here, he's holding his arm, and he's holding it, and he's holding it. He just can't hold it anymore. You understand the punishment. The Chachamim are making this guy suffer. He did an Avon, or he wanted to do an Avon, and now he wants to make Teshuvah. They're not letting it out easy. Right? Don't just do Hilul Shabbat and think you can get, oh, I want to make Teshuvah now. Okay, we'll make Teshuvah. So suffer a little. So the guy's going to hold his hand now, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And then eventually he's finally going to have, he won't be able to physically hold the fruits anymore. He drops the fruits. So that would be a type of shogeg, or even honest. I would say it's even honest. If he reaches a point where he can't hold the fruits anymore, that's honest. I think that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to reach the point where you just physically can't hold the fruits anymore. Right? Okay. Or maybe it's 5 minutes, Shabbat is going to be over, and then you'll be able to just hold the fruits for 5 minutes. המתכוון לזרוק שמונה אמות ברשות הרבים. ונח החפץ בסוף 4 חייב. Let's say a person wanted to throw an object 8 amot. 8 amot is, let's say, 4 yards in the Reshut Rabim. Now, we said that in the Reshut Rabim, it's ma'avir daled amot is hayav. It's enough to throw an object or transport an object 4 amot to be hayav. Now, his intention was to throw it 4 amot. But it didn't make it, meaning he miscalculated. He threw it. His intention was to reach there, but it only went half the distance. You would say, since in his mind, he wanted to do the melacha this way, but it ended up slightly differently. He didn't do the melacha he wanted. There's no melechet machashevet, and therefore he should be patur. No, he's hayav. He is hayav. Why? Shehare na'asa shi'ur ha'melacha. Because the minimum amount of the melacha is 4 amot. And he did want to throw the object 4 amot. He wanted to throw more than 4 amot, but he wanted to do the minimum amount of the melacha. And in that regard, that was done. He did throw the object 4 amot. That part of his thought was fulfilled. שהדבר ידוע שאין זה החפץ מגיע לסוף שמונה עד שיעבור על כל מקום ומקום מכל השמונה. Because it's true, he wanted to throw it 8 amot. But if he wanted to throw it 8 amot, he understands that the object is not going to magically appear and disappear, or disappear and appear. But rather, the object is going to go through the distance of 4 amot in order to reach the distance of 8 amot. So then he didn't want it to go 4 amot. And that's why he's hayav. אבל אם מתכוון לזרוק 4, ונח החפץ בסוף שמונה פטור. But on the other hand, if it's the opposite, if he wanted to throw the object 4 amot, and it ended up getting thrown 8 amot, in that case it's patur. לפי שנח במקום שלא חשב שתעבור בו. בכל שכן שתנוח. Because when it reached the 8 amot line, he didn't want it to reach the 8 amot line. That was never his intention. Let's use football as an analogy. A guy, quarterback, wants to throw the, he's on the 0-yard line. He wants to throw the ball to the 2-yard line, right? Because each yard is 2 amot. You want to throw the ball to the 2-yard line. I'm sorry, he wanted to throw the ball to the 4-yard line. And it ended up landing on the 2-yard line. He's hayav. Why? Because when he threw it with the intention of reaching the 4-yard line, part of that intention was that it go over the 2-yard line. Otherwise, it can never get to the 4-yard line. And therefore, when it lands on the 2-yard line, he's hayav. If, on the other hand, his intention was to throw it to the 2-yard line, and it ends up going to the 4-yard line. He's patur because he never intended that the ball reach the 4-yard line. That wasn't part of the plan, and therefore, in that case, he's patur. Because when it reaches the 8 amot or the 4-yard line, he never intended that it get there or that it rest there. But if, on the other hand, when he threw the object, he didn't care where it lands. He just wanted to throw it 4 amot or more. Wherever it lands, then he's hayab. And the final halacha kafet. זרק לתוך 4 אמות, ונתגלגל חוץ ל4 אמות, פטור. If he threw an object, and his intention was that it be less than 4 amot, meaning less than the shoot of the melacha, and that's what he did. He threw it less than 4 amot. But then it rolled, the object continued rolling, and then it reached outside the 4 amot. Patur, because that was not his intention. Let's say the opposite happened. He threw it with the intention of going more than 4 amot, and it reached more than 4 amot, but then it rolled back. משהו חוץ ל4 אמות, ואחר כך נתגלגל ונכנס, חייב. אם לא נחקל הלאה לזה פטור, then it depends. If when he threw the object greater than 4 amot, and it reached that distance, before rolling back, it was in a resting state. It was in a resting state. And then something disturbed the object and it rolled back. He's hayab because it was in a resting state outside the 4 amot. But if it kind of, let's say, hit a wall and then bounced back. So let's deal with a situation. You're in a shoot at a beam. You throw the object, the ball, and you wanted it to go past the 4 amot, and it hit a tree, and now it bounced back. That's patur. Because when it eventually lands, it lands within the 4 amot line, within the right, and it doesn't travel the full distance of 4 amot.